and welcome all. I'm Chris Cole. I'm incoming Vice President and current Treasurer for the Chicago chapter of CoreNet. I'm filling in for President Kurt Karnitz, who's enjoying some time away. I want to thank you all for pivoting. Some of that pivoting might have happened even as you logged in today, but certainly we pivoted away from an in-person event at Maggiano's, and I'm really grateful that you're here to join us. We have an amazing lineup of speakers and really, really glad you're here. I have some business I'm just going to go through. Certainly, we're doing belonging as a workplace strategy. The DE&I workplace looks like I'm going to have a little spelling error to address there. Quick note, upcoming events on April 28th, certainly well-being in the work experience, what matters most at Maggiano's, that will be in person. And then a save the date for September 15th, the CoreNet Classic Golf outing. And I'm going to go through this now, and I'll probably do it one more time before we hand off the screen. And just want to share with you, as you've logged in, and if you're new here to Zoom, certainly you'll see in the top right corner a way to switch from the speaker view to see both the speaker and the PowerPoint presentation. Certainly located towards the center of your screen are two vertical bars, and that slide bar allows you to expand the speaker's presentation or make the individual speaker who's speaking a different size. And then for chat, I want to share with you how we're going to capture questions today. And we do encourage questions. So there's a chat located in the center console. It's at the bottom of the screen, and you can submit your questions here. As I go from slide to slide, I'll be doing a quick scan of chat, and we're going to address questions as they come in as we transfer from one slide to the next. So please feel free to load questions there, and we'll get those out to our speakers here. And I wanted to just walk you through some thank yous for our chapter sponsors. Chapter sponsors are a real important part of how CoreNet Chicago continues to be successful and be able to just grow. And so lots of support on the platinum sponsor side. I'm not going to read them all for our speakers who may be new to some of these. So these are a blend of, we've got architectural, got suppliers, got a lot of GCs, certainly design, real estate for sure, and then some end users starting to come in. All big thank yous to all of those speakers. And one last check on our Zoom page. Make sure everybody wants to read through this one more time. Again, a reminder, chat, that's the best place to load your questions. And now I am going to switch screens. Young, just checking in. Are you seeing your main belonging as a workplace strategy screen?
Yep, I do see it. Thank you.
And with that, Young In, I'm passing off the baton to you. And from Unispace, welcome. And I'll turn over the platform to you.
Sure, thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Young In with Unispace. I'm the member of CoreNet Chicago chapter, the programs committee, and I have an honor of introducing our panelists today, amazing panelists we have here. If you can go to the next page, Chris. I have a hardest time summarizing their impressive bios into few sentences. They had few-page bios I had to go through, so I'll go through them quickly. I did narrow it down. So our first panel is Danielle Bly, Vice President of Supplier of Diversity of WEC Energy Group. She's been with the WEC Energy Group for 22 years and has held a variety of positions. In her current role, she is responsible for fostering corporate relationship with suppliers, contractors, area businesses, and local government. In addition to this, she works in the community, facilitating proactive, mutually beneficial relationships with business advocacy groups and women and minority-owned and operated businesses. She serves as the board of the director of We Energies and Wisconsin Public Service Foundation, the Greater Milwaukee Urban League, Wisconsin Energy Workforce Consortium, Black Arts NKE, and the Advisory Council for Milwaukee Film Black Lens. Danielle was acknowledged as a Woman of Influence community supporter by the Milwaukee Business Journal, received the Bridge Build Her Award from the Power Her Network. The most recently was named the recipient of the 2021 Trailblazer and Women's Leadership Award from St. John Atida High School. With that, I'll move on to Collette. Collette English Dixon is Executive Director of Marshall Bennett Institute of Real Estate, Roosevelt University. She has more than 30 years of investment management with a focus on commercial real estate investing. She's the Executive Director of Marshall Bennett Institute of Real Estate at Roosevelt University, where she oversees all aspects of the undergraduate real estate major and the MSRE, MBA, RE degree programs. She's the first African-American woman leader of a higher education real estate program in the US. Prior to her current role, she was Executive Director, Transactions for PGIM Real Estate, a business unit of Prudential Financial, and co-leader of their National Investment Dispositions Program. She's a past president of Crew Network and Crew Chicago, and past chair of the Crew Network Foundation. She's also a global governing trustee and member of the America's Executive Committee of ULI. Last but not least, Marjorie McCarthy is Chief Marketing Officer for Unispace. She leads the global Marcoms team at Unispace. She's a B2B marketing leader who is passionate about building and growing great brands and connecting them with the right audiences. Marjorie has nearly 20 years of experience developing successful marketing and communication strategies for large global brands, as well as rapidly scaling high growth companies across a number of industries and markets, from India to US to Latin America and everywhere in between. And with that, without further ado, I'll have Marjorie take it away.
Everyone. Thanks, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. We're going to have an amazing conversation. I wanted to just acknowledge before we get started, I'm pinch hitting a little bit today. Shelley Wright, who is our Chief Diversity Officer at Unispace, had set up an amazing panel with Danielle and Collette, and I know you all had a super robust pre-conversation that we're hoping to recreate a little of that magic here. And just as an example of the world that we're all navigating right now, Shelley tested positive for COVID earlier this week and has been pretty unwell. And so she asked me to pinch hit here, which I'm super humbled to do, but really looking forward to this conversation. Shelley and I work really closely together at Unispace in our roles and helping tell the story of our DEIB journey at Unispace, as well as advising our clients on their DEIB journeys with regard to their workplaces. So Chris, if we can move to the next slide, just to talk a little bit about our conversation today. What we thought we would do is kick it off with just framing our conversation with a little bit of data. And then we will move into a discussion with Collette and Danielle that looks at a couple of different elements. We really want to focus on how supplier diversity, inclusive hiring and workplace really intersect in the DEIB conversation. Next slide, please, Chris. So we thought we would start by just looking at some data it's always interesting to start a conversation on DEIB looking at data. One of the things that I always think is really interesting is just how quickly the data in the DEIB space is evolving, right? And so we thought we'd share a couple data points here and really interested to have our conversation with this frame. So the first one is that half of talent professionals are not held accountable for interviewing a diverse slate of candidates. That's a really interesting data point and one I think we'll want to get to when we're talking about hiring practices. Second data point is over a third of companies report that their upper management outside of supplier diversity programs are actively involved in supplier diversity programs. Also a really interesting data point. And then lastly, when we're looking at what employees are asking of their companies right now, half of current employees want to see their companies doing more in the DEIB space and to increase diversity. So, I think that those are all three really good data points to frame what we're going to start talking about. So we also wanted to share a couple of data points from a recent survey that Unispace and Collete conducted together. And this survey was really focused on the intersection of employee engagement, employee experience, DEIB, and the workplace. And it was great because this is where we were really able to leverage the power of Collete. We talked to over 100 leaders across the real estate community, 17 countries represented there, 13 industries represented. And what was really interesting is that 90% of those respondents noted that their company either has a DEI program or is actively developing a DEI program currently. So the universe of folks we're talking to, nearly all of us are at some point on our DEIB journey. We asked, oh, I'm sorry, Chris, go to the next slide. One more slide, sorry. Okay, so we asked, apologies, I forgot that I was supposed to cue you there. So we asked respondents what some of the top challenges their organizations are facing. And, I think this probably comes as a surprise to none of us that talent is that top concern that all organizations are seeing today. But we're also seeing that, over a third say that DEIB and incorporating DEIB practices into their work environments is one of their biggest challenges. Interestingly as well, one of the top answers was that organizations are having a challenge with their operational excellence and cost efficiency. So I actually think these are three interesting data points that we can talk about when we think about hiring practices and supplier diversity programs too. Chris, next slide, please. Okay, so then we asked our respondents, what are the strategic drivers that are most informing the real estate decisions that they're making? And again, we're seeing talent recruitment, operational excellence at the top of that. But then the third highest was in corporate brand and how companies are bringing to life their corporate brand in the physical environment. This is a really interesting space, and I know it's one that we're talking a lot about with our clients and incorporating into that conversation as well, the conversation around belonging. Next slide, please, Chris. Okay, so then we asked our respondents, how are their companies incorporating employee experience? 83% said that their companies are actively incorporating employee experience into their workplaces. How are they doing this, Chris? If you can tap through on the animations there. 65 are incorporating wellness programs in. 48% are incorporating professional development opportunities. 45%, nearly half, are looking at branded experience in their physical spaces. And then 43% are incorporating food and beverage perks in. So we're seeing it sort of a wide array of ways that companies are incorporating employee experience into their workplace strategies. Next slide, Chris. So then we also asked, how are companies incorporating DEIB specifically into their workplace strategy? 60% of our respondents said that their companies are actively doing that in some way. And the ways that they're doing that are 85% are looking at their hiring practices, 67%, so 2/3 are looking at training. About 2/3 are looking at goal setting, and about 2/3 are also looking at how they leverage employee resource groups. We've actually just recently launched a couple of employee resource groups at Unispace. That's been a really powerful resource for us. Okay, so Chris, if you will move to the next slide now. Happy to discuss any of that data further, but really wanted to turn it to Danielle and Collette now. We're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about supplier diversity, and we're going to talk about inclusive hiring. And Danielle and Collette are both amazing experts in these spaces. So Danielle, thought we would maybe start with you. When we're thinking about supplier diversity, can we talk about the business case? How many times a week do you find yourself making the business case for supplier diversity? Or do you feel that we've moved beyond that conversation now?
Great question. First of all, thank you to Cornet, to my friend Heather Turner-Loft, who invited me to participate with you all. Heather and I do a lot of work here together community-wise in Milwaukee. And although I manage the Supplier Diversity Initiative for WEC Energy Group, specifically for your Cornet chapter in Chicago, People's Gas and North Shore Gas are underneath that umbrella, which you may be familiar with. So we have 2 utilities in Wisconsin, 2 in Chicago, and then we also have gas utilities in Michigan and Minnesota. So to answer your question, Marjorie, I talk about the business case very often. And even more so now. I've been with the company, as you may have heard in my bio, for 22 years, in this role since the last 3. So starting in January 2020, and then we all got the rug pulled from underneath us, right? Just a couple months later, and operating more so in a virtual space. But because of that, and because of specifically all the social unrest that we've gone through, that business case for supplier diversity is still a very, very hot topic. And so many organizations are finding themselves on different spectrums, right? When it comes to that, we as a utility have been at this since 2002, 2003. So although it's been a long time, we still find the challenge, right, within it. And oftentimes that's, we get comfortable. We get complacent in how we operate, who we do business with, a lot of that middle management layer within our organization. Sometimes they often have the buying power and get comfortable with the same prime suppliers, non-diverse suppliers that they've been used to doing business with. So we definitely see it as a part of our diversity, equity and inclusion and belonging strategy within our organization. That business case for us is all around innovation. It's moving more from just being the right thing to do to being the socially and the responsible thing to do. Our investors and our stakeholders want to know, what are you doing in the corporate responsibility space when it comes to community, when it comes to your supplier base, and then also workforce diversity, right? So again, it brings the innovation, it drives competition, and ultimately gives us more positive outcomes each year.
Yeah. Collette, do you have anything that you want to kick us off with regard to this topic?
So thanks so much for the opportunity to participate in this panel. I think that what Danielle is saying is that change is hard, that it is disruptive to the status quo. It often results in pushback, results in resistance. But the importance of the messaging, the importance of the effort is something that just cannot be just dismissed. We can't get to a point where we go, we've done this, and so that's fine. We've made a change. That's enough. We've come up with these random levels where we go, well, we've increased this by 25%. Well, 25% of 5 is not much. We've got to look at these opportunities, the importance of bringing the diversity in the room because of what it can do both from a societal change perspective by giving wealth opportunities to smaller firms or providing a pathway for advancement and for company growth that actually lifts more boats than just the boat they're in. But look at this as being kind of a key component of what companies are. When you're talking about this whole idea about brand, brand also goes to how you engage with other people, not just your employees, but how you engage with the community at large. So that change has so many positive ramifications. We also have to recognize that the opportunities for having diverse suppliers are really created by people doing the work and doing this intentionally to identify new suppliers, to helping to support business growth, business planning. Sometimes it's more than just that, let me give you a little contract and that works. In order to actually create sustainable diversity that actually can be, a major component of a company's business plan, we're going to have to sometimes do a little bit more than that. And I think it's really important for companies to look at that as a piece of who they are also, that they're willing to do the work to help develop these diverse suppliers and help them become the sort of firms that don't just have to rely on you. They become truly market worthy, scalable platforms that can do more than just work for your one company. So the supplier diversity challenges are really not much different than the diversity issues we have in so many other parts of the world. It takes that, willingness to kind of step in a little bit further, to be really intentional about it, and to recognize that, the resistance is going to be easy to just kind of fold on, or the acceptance of, fairly modest improvements is really easy for people to go, look what we did. It's definitely not enough. And we've got to keep that messaging out there and keep pushing that button.
So a two-part follow-up question to this. So you've both touched on the fact that different companies, certainly some companies are truly leaders in this space and have fully built supplier diversity as a core tenet of their business model. There are a lot of companies that are very much still on that journey, are just getting started with their programs. One sort of first question is, what's your advice to companies and leaders who are kind of that more initial or evolving stage of their journey? And then, I guess this is aligned to it, how do you find it's most impactful to carry the message and the importance of supplier diversity? Is it through, and I'm sure it's a combo, is it through data? Is it through storytelling? Would love both of your perspectives on that.
Absolutely. I'm going to defer to Danielle first.
Oh, sure. No, great question. So, and Collette, you hit on some really great points in terms of the challenge, and it ties into your first question, Marjorie. The advice I would give is you have to have that top-down support. So for us at WEC, our top-down support looks like our board of directors being on board, our executive chairman, our CEO, our senior leaders to myself, and then we're uniquely structured where we also have a liaison within each business division to champion and drive supplier diversity. So when I have a question about a budget or forecast for the year, I know exactly who to go to and who's responsible for that within each business area. And then most importantly, it's a part of our performance goals, right? So we all know what gets measured gets done. We all know as management employees within this organization, when we sit down at the end of the year to look at the success of the organization, this is a piece of the pie that we're all responsible for. So that's the biggest piece of advice I can give. You still have your challenges in some of those middle areas, but again, that alignment goes right to the top. So I think that is absolutely key. Your other question about what's most impactful, one of the things that I'm working on this year is telling that story and telling the story differently and in a way that people can receive. We talk so much about spend. You'll hear about, the $1 billion roundtable. You'll hear about what all companies are spending with diverse businesses, and that is good. And that's how we drive our goal. We look every year to achieve more spend with diverse companies, but how are we truly impacting our economies? As I mentioned, supplier diversity is for us on our top 10 goals. It falls right underneath our goal of supporting our local economies. Well, let's talk about how we're doing that outside of just the spend, right? So this year we're working on an economic impact report. We've done one for a couple of the utilities in the past. We haven't done one for the footprint as a whole. And I'm really excited about that because I think if you're president of our Illinois utility, whether you're president of Wisconsin, Michigan, or Minnesota, you should be able to tell a consistent story. You should be able to say, not only are we spending X amount of dollars, $200 million in these economies, but this is what we're doing to the job growth. This is how we're impacting the tax base. This is how our diverse suppliers are also spending in these communities that we serve. And again, you peel the onion back and you tell that story in a way that people can resonate with. And it really means more than just spend. So I'll stop there and let Collette speak to that.
I totally love the story thing. It is the way that you can truly feel impact is when you can see how it can ripple through a community. It is not just about that one contract with that one company. That's not even the story, right? It's about how that one company or those two companies, those three companies, whatever that is, how there's a multiplier effect for everything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also really important to incorporate into these stories the way that we can help frame the picture of what is diversity in this space. Because I think there's some knee-jerk reactions to what diversity looks like for a lot of people, especially people early on the journey who are just trying to figure out kind of how they can get into this quickly, show some gains, show some successes really fast. Diversity is diversity. I mean, it is all about the big bowl of wax around diversity. And it's not just about finding a few African-American owned firms or a few women-owned firms or whatever. It's about the holistic idea of diversity and the impact that those dollars have as you go through that, multifaceted engagement with it can be just massive. It brings forth both an understanding and appreciation of the value proposition of diversity, but it also helps a company really see how they are having that kind of impact. And I think those sort of success stories breed other successes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have two more questions, but I also just wanted to remind folks in the audience that please put your questions into the chat or raise your hand. Chris, remind us how to do this, but would love for us to be interacting with the audience if folks have questions in real time. So please don't be shy. So a couple other things just wanted to touch on with regard to supplier diversity before we start talking about inclusive hiring is, and so maybe take your pick about what y'all want to talk about. Would love to talk a little bit about metrics and measurement. What are the most impactful ways you are finding that, and obviously this goes into the conversation we've been having so far, but there's a whole conversation around measurement and metrics. I'd love to talk a little bit about that. And then likewise, there's this whole kind of conversation around myth busting and perceptions of what supplier diversity means or doesn't mean. So let me just put those two themes out there, and Danielle and Collette, talk about what you'd like to talk about on this.
Well, I want to jump in on the myth busting because I think the metrics piece is something that Danielle probably has a much clearer path to sharing some insights on that. Back to the stories, right? And back to what people think about what is diversity. And for some people, diversity always comes with some idea of let's just throw out the ugly word of the day, affirmative action. You've given some sort of opportunity to someone who some people may perceive as being not worthy because you're trying to do something else. You're trying to achieve this, check the box stuff. And so, someone gets that just because they are diverse, not because their company is worthy of it. I mean, the myth busting goes back to some of just the challenges of putting this through, because there continues to be that resistance in some quadrants that diverse firms don't get these opportunities because they're not worthy of them. We get these roles, or ABC company gets this contract, holds on to it into perpetuity because they're worthy. And this other firm, LMK firm, isn't worthy, but oh my gosh, you gave them that because they're, I don't know, check the box of which diverse box you want to fill. That is a problem. That totally undermines the integrity of what you're doing. It undermines the integrity of the firm that you've gone with. It undermines the integrity of your corporate effort. It's not about nobody wants to be given anything, right? Everybody wants their fair shot. Everybody wants to compete on the same level, and many, many firms can compete toe to toe with non-diverse firms when given the opportunity. And so it is incredibly important for programs that find that there is value and importance to promoting a diverse supplier engagement process that they are putting out there in clear, bold letters. This isn't about favoritism. Actually, maybe the other model was. This is about fair opportunity given to firms that are quite qualified, and we track how they're quite qualified. I'm probably right now in kind of a really sore point because of being, people being qualified and being thrown to the wolves unnecessarily just due to some other things that are happening in DC right now. And I'm just like, the knee-jerk reaction that some people are going to have is the one we have to work hardest against. And that applies to supplier diversity, and it applies to our hiring discussion that we're going to have in the middle. And I think that's a key component of the myth busting that just still remains to be done on a consistent and regular basis. And we got to own the importance of that.
Thank you, Collette. I'll piggyback on that and say one of the ways that, and this ties into a little bit, Marjorie, in the setting goals and ensuring accountability, is, and I believe this is the best practice from a supplier diversity perspective, is that you have to be married to procurement, right? You can't have a supplier diversity initiative and then your procurement folks have no clue about it. They are not your champions of it. I always tell people I'm responsible for the entire footprint. I've got one manager in Illinois and then my executive assistant. And they're from like, well, how do you do it? Because I have a procurement team that supports us in everything we do. Our processes also are aligned so that our goal for supplier diversity stays prioritized. And to just piggyback on Colette's comments about the myth busting in that process, we really work hard to level that playing field. There's no reason any buyer should come back with a competitive bid to say we couldn't find a diverse company to do this work. It's part of the process to be proven out that you looked for. You need to document, right? That's the case. And And if not, why? If we're doing work, and I mentioned this in our kind of intro call with Shelley and Collette earlier, or a couple of weeks ago, that we have a process, an ARS process, that if there's work being bid out, that's being bid out for $500,000 or more professional services, or if it's construction over $1 million, that not only goes past my desk, the president of the utility, as well as our CEO. And there's a definite line that says, was there an SDI, a diverse business that was capable of doing this work? If so, did they bid? And how did it, rank out? So that process has to be married, and that helps alleviate some of that myth busting. On the metric standpoint, to answer your question fast, and then I know we've got to get to some our other topics, spend, as I mentioned, is always key. We look at what's our total spend percentage compared to what our total procurement spend was. So if we spent $400 million across the company or the footprint, how much of that, was given to diverse businesses? We break it down by diverse business categories. So women-owned, minority-owned, and then veteran-owned, et cetera. And then even within that, because I manage across multiple states, we have requirements from a regulatory perspective as a utility. The Illinois Commerce Commission wants to know, well, what's the ethnicity underneath that minority-owned breakdown, right? So how many African-American owned, Asian, Hispanic, you name it. And then we look at the categories. What category of business are you spending in? For us as a utility, we look across the board, not just construction, which is really significant for us and what drives most of our diverse spend. But also professional services. That's one of the areas where we really want to pick it up. Who were we using in finance? Who were we using in the IT space? One of our great success stories is partnering with a company in Chicago, SDI Presence, to kind of Colette's point, not just using them as a subcontractor, but partnering them with Accenture to do project work. Accenture can take a piece, they take a piece, and then they become tier 1 spend for us, right? They now have exposure within the company, new projects come up. So we're trying to mirror some of that best practice across the footprint. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and then some. I feel like we could keep talking on this topic, but I do want to make sure that we talk about hiring. Chris, if you can advance the slides. And again, I'm mindful of time. Let's see. Yeah, thank you. I'm mindful of time, and also just, if folks in the audience have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat, because we could keep chatting otherwise, and I want to make sure that we get to those. So turning a little bit to hiring now. Going back to the data that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, we all know talent and recruitment is one of the top challenges, and it's definitely the buzziest of buzzwords right now in terms of corporate opportunity and risk, frankly. So Collette, we'll start with you here. How do you align that with making sure we're having conversations that frame hiring as inclusive?
Well, I think, one of the statistics that you shared to me is a key component of why this is still such a challenge. And that is to tell me that only 47% of talent recruiters are accountable for their efforts to identify and bring to the table qualified diverse candidates. 47%. If that's the case, this is going to continue to be an issue for many, many more moons than I care to admit. It is imperative, similar to the issue around, top-down engagement around supplier diversity. It's top-down engagement and accountability for the identification, the sourcing, and the engagement of diverse talent. And that people know that that is a key process that they have got to own and they've got to execute. And if that's not there, we're not going to make it. Boom, right? And if that's not there, the people who work for you know that.
Hmm.
And that is going to have that, domino effect of people realizing that diversity, inclusion, equity, all of that is not top of mind when it comes to the management and securing of talent. And you'll actually have as much of an issue on the back door as you'll have on the front door, because people will realize that that is not part of your culture. And right now, when you're talking about the challenge of finding talent and securing talent in the middle of what people want to continue to call the great resignation, which I think is just the great relocation. I think people are going from one job to another as much as anything else. But that is a key driver for what people are looking for right now, is a culture that appears to be inclusive, wants them there, will help them succeed, and that it's part of who the company is. And if they don't have that, they'll go somewhere else. And if you're not accountable for making that happen, starting with people coming in the front door, it's just not gonna stick. It's gonna continue to be a challenge. And the demographics aren't necessarily working toward companies trying to hire people. The whole entrepreneurial bent is becoming increasingly a driver as companies are not showing their understanding of the dynamics of what today's employee needs. They keep going back to, what you could get people to do in 2000 or 1990. You can't do that anymore. So you've got to recognize that the whole process has to have accountability, and that leadership has got to own it and enforce it.
Can I just add to that? I agree. The entire process has to have accountability. And when you look at that process, I think organizations always have to take a step back and say, who's at the table when these decisions are being made? Who's at the table when we put out our marketing for recruitment? I was asked to give some feedback on for a company. They were looking to recruit candidates to apply for their scholarships. And I said, well, when I look at your website, there's not one person that looks like me that ever received one. Why would I think I should apply for one and I'm going to get
it?
Exactly. Right. So there's got to be more thoughtfulness around who's at the table making decisions. Because if you don't have that diversity of thought, if you don't have, it's going to continue to look the same. And so I just wanted to add that, because I think it's throughout the entire process. It's not just in the recruiting. It's how are you attracting, how are you telling your story to encourage people to even apply and work with your organization.
And I think it's really interesting that the stats that you were showing, Marjorie, where we've got this thing where 60% of companies are saying that they're incorporating, DE&I in all of these different steps, but yet only 47% of talent recruiters are accountable, or 50% of employees are saying you need to do more. What companies think they're doing and what everybody else is either doing or thinks that they're doing, there's a disconnect there.
Well, I think that takes us to maybe like another part of this conversation too, where there's the whole, it's a little provocative, but there's the whole conversation around just what's transactional and what is actually, really, truly inclusive, right? And I think so, would love your thoughts on that. I think that so many companies are really having, even if intentions are good, are having a lot of challenge in terms of the way that they're coming along their journey here, right? And going from a place that feels perhaps transactional or done halfway to really fully embodying this. I would love your thoughts on that.
I'm happy to start, Collette. I got a couple thoughts.
Yeah.
Sometimes I liken this, prior to this role, I had many years in customer service, and we used to talk a lot about customer engagement, right? That it's 2/3 feel and 1/3 do. 2/3 of the transaction was how did they make you feel versus what you did. You may not have did much, but how did you leave that customer? And I think you can apply that as an employer-employee, situation, especially when it comes to inclusivity and DEI. How are we making people feel? when they're at work, when they are here with us. And one example I'll give, and I'll speak for my experience within our organization, ebb and flows, right? It ebbs and flows. There are sometimes I'm like, yeah, we're on our way, we're getting it. There are moments where I'm like, I can't believe that just happened. You know, the training fall apart. Where are we going? And so, but last year and after social unrest, so many organizations put out statements. People are looking for what's the action now behind those statements. A couple of our actions were driven by our employee resource groups. And what I truly felt was more, less transactional, more, this is how, you know, we're doing something and it feels good. For example, book clubs. You know, we read White Fragility, one of our employer resource groups there, but you know what, we read it and our CEO showed up to the meeting. He's reading it too. That's huge. That says a lot. In my 22 years prior to this past CEO, wouldn't have expected it and was very surprised by it. And that's just me being transparent with you all. But that's an example, I think, of, you know, employees have to feel that they are a part of the environment and the organization is more than just what they read on their intranet or the statements that they see online.
Yeah, performative inclusion is very transparent. And, you know, as Danielle mentioned, you know, over the past couple of years, we've had a number of companies suddenly go through this eureka moment of having to be outspoken about their commitment to DEIB, to their awareness of their past gaps in having environments or commitments or engagements around that. And we're going to do better, and we know we should do better. And now we're all waiting to make sure people actually do better. It is, again, hard. It is incredibly hard because for many companies, it requires a significant change in culture and operations. And there will be incredible resistance. I mean, I remember being in a space where, you know, you created like a women's network because the women in the firm were feeling particularly unappreciated, not provided the opportunities, feeling as though there was inequity with advancement and all of that. The moment that happened, the reaction from those who were not women in the organization around, well, what does that mean for me? You know, there is a perception in this world that the pie is finite. So to the extent that you move the needle for somebody, you're taking something from somebody else.
Yep.
We need to build the mindset that the pie grows, that the engagement of diverse thought, diverse participation, the value of diversity in the decision process and how we do business, where we do business, what we do business, all of those things helps grow the pie so that everybody's able to benefit from that is a mindset that we have got to put front and center to change the perspectives of those people who are resistant to it. We've got to show them that the pie grows. The pie is not limited. And actually, it's probably limited if you're not diverse. More, the lack of diversity probably limits you a lot more than anything else. So for your own selfish self-interest, right? There's value here for you to embrace this and to advance it sincerely, not performatively, but sincerely.
I think that speaks to diversity, understanding it. It's not just a journey as an organization, it's a journey as an individual, right? And we all sit in different spaces. I, cannot, as much as Collette and I can probably relate on a lot of things, our experiences and who we are as individuals are still very different, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, those are really important points. I know we have about 5 minutes left and we do have a question that's come in. So here's a question, excuse me, for you, I guess, Danielle. WEC has grown through acquisition. And I'm wondering how early in due diligence is understanding what position or point of view the new company has around supplier diversity and DEIB in their recruiting processes. How does onboarding the new company and people merge into WEC's corporate high-performing success around these goals?
Oh, that's a great question. So our acquisition really occurred 2015 when we became WEC. And, you know, let me say this, there are still efforts to streamline in our onboarding processes, even in supplier diversity. As I mentioned, you know, we operate across several different states, different regulatory bodies. So again, with putting out an economic impact report helps us to tell a more consistent story, because what's required in Illinois is not required in Wisconsin. And I'll tell you, over the last 2 years, a lot of public service commissions in the utility space are looking to Illinois because it's such a best practice. The requirement to have your utilities report out, what are you doing, not just in supplier, but workforce diversity. So it was last year that I submitted our first annual report to, you know, the Wisconsin Commission. So we look across the footprint to find what are those best practices that we can apply. And so I would say it started early on, but there's still opportunity within the space to get consistent, identify what works well, and move forward with that. More so, have the tough conversations about what's not working. I often find that that is still a challenge in this space because those conversations are often hard. And, you know, it's easier to pad it with training or do something else and move on. If you really want to get to the root of some things, those conversations have to happen. So we're still in a bit of a journey, but again, it's applying those best practices and getting the right folks at the table to do it.
That's great. Does anyone else have any questions from the audience? Well, maybe we can end. So if we're going back to the title of this, session was belonging as a workplace strategy. Thinking about what I feel like we've just sort of gotten below the tip of the iceberg here in our time, but thinking about what we've discussed, Collette, Danielle, any parting words, just reframing us back to like thinking about that broad topic of belonging in the workplace? Like what are final thoughts you might like to give us to end today?
I'll just quickly say, I think for me, every day coming into my role, my company, and I've been here for a long time, there's always that opportunity to assess, as like I said, as an organization, but then also as an individual, right? What am I contributing? How can I ensure I'm able to show up as whole and as authentic as possible every day, and that the people around me can do the same? And when instances pop that that's not happening, what are we doing about them, right? Because everyone's on a different space, a different journey in this. And it's really around being thoughtful and taking action, right? I often hear sometimes people feel like we're not doing enough. You know, we're only doing X, Y, Z. We might offend somebody if we do that, but you're doing something, because I promise you there are others who are doing nothing at all. All right, so I'd end with that.
You're always gonna upset somebody. Yeah, it's just the way it is. Back to my change is hard. Belonging is the outcome of the other stuff. People feel as though they belong in a space that gives to them the sense that they're seen, they're appreciated, they're engaged, they're given the same opportunities, they're in an environment that recognizes them for who they are. And if you do the other things, you can develop that sense for people. If you really do and own the other things, it's not, back to this is not performative. This is like being. It is part of your cultural DNA. And when you develop that sense of belonging, people often are willing to give more of themselves, to do more for you as a firm, are willing to engage in a way that helps those outcomes holistically grow and be better for everybody. So it's a workplace strategy that requires the foundational understanding of the cultural changes you have to make so that people feel as though they absolutely are meant to be there, want to be there, are respected for being there, are included in things that, know that they add value and they are valued. So we've been playing DEI for a while. It's time to take that and roll it forward to something that is personally impactful to your workplace, that actually brings value holistically. And there's a lot that can be gained from that.
It's a good way to end. I know we're right at 2:00. Chris Young, I assume we'll wrap it up now.
Can we squeeze in one quick question? There's one more on here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't notice there was
It
another
popped
one.
up during that close, and it's been an amazing conversation so far. This question is, do companies encourage their BRGs to not be represented solely by people in that respective group? And do you think, does this help support diversity efforts?
Do you mean not represented, meaning having like a corporate representative as part of the BRG who's not from that group, if that's what you mean?
I'm hoping Craig Cudzillo.
I'll chime in. Thanks for addressing that. Our company is great about supporting BRGs, and I think it's awesome. But I'm also in a veterans group, and I see everybody in it is a veteran, and I think what I'd like to see is the cross representation. So we have a lot more cultural understanding, so it doesn't just become that BRG is protecting their own interest.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do we share those ideas across? Because I think that's what we're really trying to accomplish. So I was just curious, thoughts on that, where you've seen if that's been successful or not.
Real quick, I will say, I think it is good for diversity efforts. One of the things we work to do, because you are going to attract the like-minded folks, the folks who can relate to that specific BRG, but our executive sponsors for our BRGs are typically not right, directly affiliated with that resource group. So myself and our senior vice president are executive sponsors for the African-American BRG, but he is a white male, right? So we've been intentional about doing some crossing there, and then finding the synergies with BRG. So if one BRG is putting on an activity, making sure all are invited, right, and have an opportunity to participate together.
I think that sometimes it's hard to encourage employees to engage in BRGs that are not within their immediate, pathway, because of course there's only so much time in the day. But I think the opportunity to open the door to say people who have an interest in how any one business group is, what's going on with them. Like, you don't have to be Black to be part of the Black employee resource group. You don't have to be Indigenous to be part of the Indigenous people's, employees resource group. If you have an interest in it, if you, just want to learn more, you can welcome people in either as a holistic member or as a visitor. But I think it requires that group creating that open door, because I think the system makes it sound like it's supposed to be just for people in that space. So I think the organizations themselves, or the subgroups, need to note their desire to bring in other people to participate with them.
So Craig, we cross promote. So that's when I say that we invite others. If our veteran group is doing something, all the other BRGs share it with their networks too.
Hopefully that helps.
Oh, it's a great discussion. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for posting the question as well. I think we're ready to wrap up. I'll just check and make sure that our panels are good with me making a wrap here. I want to add that thank you everybody who logged in and joined and participated today, but in particular our panel and our speakers here. There's no doubt that there's authentic passion behind what you're doing, and I felt way more than 2/3 feel, and the content was great, but the feel also is so effective. So thank you so much for your contribution, Marjorie, Young, Collette, and Daniel. On behalf certainly of Heather, our programs committee, the whole board at Chicago chapter, and all of our members, thank you so much for helping us today and really sharing in this great conversation. And I agree, there's like, you can't set the bar high enough. You just have to keep moving it forward. And it's a great conversation. And I'm on my own leadership team in my own company, and you've given me some talking points to come back and share with. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank
My
you for
pleasure.
having.
Everybody, don't forget, April 28th, we'll be at Maggiano's for our next Wellbeing in the Work Experience, What Matters Most. And please, I hope you come out and join. Thank you so much, everyone.
Take care. Stay safe.
Everyone, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.